In this video, I'll introduce you to using layers in Illustrator. Layers are useful for organizing objects within your document. They're also useful for controlling the visual hierarchy of these objects because the order of layers and the objects within them controls the order in which they are drawn, with the top ones being drawn first. It's important to note that every object drawn on the artboard is listed in the Layers panel. So in this case, we have rivers and we have a shape of Lake Champlain. And if we come over to the Layers panel, which is docked here on the right-hand side, we have a layer for Vermont rivers. And if I click on the little caret or the triangle next to the name of the layer, I see a list of all 8 paths that contribute to drawing those rivers on the artboard. And if I click on the caret next to Lake Champlain, I see the compound path that makes up this Lake Champlain shape. So one thing we can do is make our layers panel more organized by adding more layers or by adding sublayers that will help us contain different sets of objects. So in this case we have 3 rivers, but if we zoom in to this area, we can actually see that there's a main river channel and then there are these 3 other little paths that contribute to describing that river system. So I would like to make some more layers over here so that we can put all of the objects or all the paths related to this river in one layer. And you can see that there's a path here, there, and these 2 down here as well. So in order to make a new layer, all I'm going to do is come down to this button that looks like a page with the corner just tipped up. It's the Create New Layer button, and if I click that, we get a new layer. And now all I need to do to move paths into my new layer is know which ones they are. So I'm going to just select it on the screen here. I can see that it's that path. I'm going to click and drag it up into that other layer. And I'm going to hold the Shift button to select more than one path. And that way I can just drag them all up into layer 3. And now I can see that I have all of these paths in that layer. I could even rename that layer, and since I know that this is the Otter Creek, I could double click on it, and now I get the option for a new layer name. I'll call this Otter Creek. And I can change the color of that layer. All the color is useful for is the color of the handles when you select objects in that layer. So if I click OK and then select that river, you'll see that it uses green handles. And those are pretty visible, so I'm going to stick with green. Now, since Otter Creek is really a Vermont river, I would like to have this Otter Creek layer as a sublayer within Vermont rivers. And if I want that, all I need to do is drag that layer down so that it's underneath Vermont rivers. And now I've got an Otter Creek sublayer in Vermont rivers. So say I wanted to do the same thing with these other rivers, but I wanted to take a slightly faster route and just make sublayers right off the bat. I can select Vermont rivers, so I know it's the layer that I'm making a new sublayer in, and then come down to the Create New Sublayer button, which has the return arrow and then the little new layer icon with the page that's turned up. I'll click on that, and I get a new sublayer, layer 4, under there. So maybe I'll call this the Winooski River. It's got a blue color, and I'm okay with that. And I know that this is the Winooski River, so I will put that in there. And now we have a new sublayer called the Winooski River. And last but not least, we have the Lamoille River up here on top, and so I'm going to make a new sublayer for that. Okay. And then I'm going to select that path, hold Shift, and that will select all of the paths between that and the next one that I click, and then I can just drag them all into Lamoille River. So now I have 3 sublayers under my Vermont Rivers layer. The other thing I can do is make something called groups, which help me to select things on screen. You'll notice that if I go and try to select that Otter Creek system, and I click on the path, it will still only select that one path. And if I come over here to my layers menu, I can see that that path is selected because it has a little green box next to it. I would really rather be able to select all of those on screen together. So this main path plus this, and this little thing up here. And so to do that, I can make something called a group. So if I go ahead and select all of these paths, I'm going to select the main channel and then hold Shift to select all these little subchannels. And then come up to Object and select Group. Now I have this new object in my Layers panel called a group, and if we click the caret we can see that it has all these paths in it. But if I come and select on my artboard, I'll select the whole group at once. And that can be really handy if you've assembled something like a legend or a title box that has multiple different objects in it, and you want to be able to move those on screen all at once by selecting just one thing. It's very easy to remove objects from a group. All I need to do is select those objects in the Layers panel, and then I can just drag them right out from underneath the group, and the group will dissolve. I'm going to undo just to show you a slightly different way of doing that. If I select the group and then come up to Object and select Ungroup, it'll also remove those objects from the group. The Layers panel also provides another way of selecting objects. That's what these little circles are for next to each object or layer over here in the panel. So if I wanted to select this little path, I could just click on the circle and it would become selected on screen. I could also select everything in that Otter Creek sublayer by clicking on the circle for the sublayer, and then it will automatically grab everything within that sublayer. I could even select all the Vermont rivers by selecting the circle for the Vermont rivers layer, and you can see that now it's gotten the objects in both the yellow, blue, and green sublayers for the Lamoille, Winooski, and Otter Creek river systems. The other thing I can do with layers is turn them on and off. So say that I didn't want to be seeing or dealing with the Lake Champlain object right now. I could just come over to this Lake Champlain layer and toggle the visibility of the layer off by clicking on the little eyeball there. You'll see that Lake Champlain has gone away, and you'll see that the visibility for this for the object within that layer has been sort of grayed out. And that's saying this isn't visible, but it's invisible because something above it has been made invisible. The other thing I can do is make layers active or inactive for editing by locking a layer. So say that I was working on the river systems and I really didn't want to mess up my Lake Champlain shape. I can come over to this little box right here and put a lock in the Lake Champlain layer. And again, you'll note that there's a grayed out lock under the Lake Champlain path here to denote that I can't edit that path, but it's because there's a lock that's been placed on a layer that's in a hierarchy above it. So if I come over here to the screen, now that that's been locked, I can't select Lake Champlain, and therefore I'm safe to work on things around it without being afraid that I'm going to edit it inadvertently. If I unlock it, then I can come over and grab the shape.